And it is that while the lethality of their power is greater than ever, their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historical low. Namely, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people, literally. It was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people.
The smoke in the air of our Concord bridges and Pearl Harbors is always smelled first by the farmers who come from their simple homes to find the fire and fight.
But if you embark on instituting a society where government protects you from yourself, you're in big trouble, and that's what they're doing. That's all government is force. I mean, do you have a choice about paying Medicare taxes? This government uses force to mold behavior or mold the economy. They've overstepped the bounds, and they violated the whole concept of our revolution and our Constitution.
Well, it's Monday evening, everybody, and it's time once again for the Freedom Link right here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. I'm Joe Joseph, and guess what, folks? I have two special treats tonight. The first one is the amazing Tim Watts is making his triumphant return.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Right.
This was a big guest, Joe.
That's right. See, I let him out of his hole for our well-known guests. And our second treat tonight, folks, is Jon Rappoport's joining us. Of course, Jon is a freelance investigative reporter, over 30 years experience, writing articles on topics ranging from politics, health, media culture for LA Weekly, Spin Magazine, Stern, CBS, Health Watch. And in 82, he was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize by LA Weekly. So it's a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege to welcome Jon Rappoport to the broadcast. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
No problem. The pleasure is ours. And, of course, one thing that really, prompted us to get a hold of you is your stance on the recent gun control legislation and, the push to try and remove the Second Amendment from society as much as they possibly can. And that seems to be the case here, especially now more than ever before. So what's your take on this whole thing, this whole gun, this move to try and restrict gun ownership in the United States?
Well, the first thing that I asked myself was if somebody else was president and they were trying to rationally, in some way, reduce gun crime, gun violence in America, what would they do? And so the first thing that popped into my mind was, well, they would address the nation and they'd have a big map up and they'd say, here's where gun violence is mainly happening in America. And they'd start, marking up areas, which would inevitably lead them to big cities, areas of big cities, gang crime, et cetera, and then they would say, we're going to undertake a serious campaign here to put criminals who use guns and committing crimes in jail, and this is not going to be just fooling around here with a committee to study it or anything like that. But of course, that didn't happen at all in the wake of Sandy Hook. That didn't happen at all. So that immediately alerted me to the fact that the present administration is going after not gun violence, but gun ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So that, to me, was the big tip-off. This is something completely different from trying to actually reduce crime, because they're not doing what any sane person would do who's trying to do that.
Right.
So that is just absolute madness, because now you're talking about whole gigantic areas of the country where there's very little gun-related violence, relatively speaking, and yet a lot of gun ownership. So that's really what they're targeting. They're not targeting gun violence at all.
Jon, did you see this coming as Obama was reelected and he spoke of things like, well, this is my mandate, the people have spoken, and now I have my mandate. Do you think that this was in the plans for a long time? That if he got reelected, that this was one of his priorities?
Yes, I think it probably was, because you could see that as soon as they shifted into high gear on this, all of a sudden, out of the woodwork came, legislation, obviously pre-written executive orders that were sitting there, you had governors of different states cooperating, legislators all talking out about it. They were just waiting for the right moment, and they had the right moment, and so they just opened up the door and started the whole push. So yes, I think this was definitely on the agenda, and it wasn't just, something, oh, well, look what happened here in Sandy Hook, so we better do something about it. No. There was a coordinated plan set up, and they are now executing that plan.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, Timmy, you know what this reminds me of? It's eerily similar to the Patriot Act before 9/11.
Yeah.
You know how that was shelved for years? They tried to pass that through. Yeah. They couldn't do it. They needed that opportunity, that one event that they could push it through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and then they tried to say that Viet Dinh put that thing together overnight, that huge, voluminous, document, which is, we all know is just absolutely BS. But, John, I wanted to ask you about, it seems to me, Joe and I have talked about this a lot, that this whole argument that the media has proffered up here is very disingenuous, to say the very least, because when you take a look at the stats that they didn't want to go out and look at, and that is the FBI's UCR stats, the Uniform Crime Report. They show that, murder by gun is down for the 5th straight year in a row. They show that, violent crime has been trending down for 20 years, and that as of 2010, we were at a 40-year low for violent crime here in the United States. But I think, the biggest thing is that watching that as gun ownership has gone up, John, again, murder by gun has gone down for the 5th straight year in a row. But yet you don't hear that from the mainstream media.
No, that's it's very important what you just pointed out here. And you won't hear it from the mainstream media because they're obviously biased on this issue, and they've been ready for a long time to execute their part of the plan, to cooperate completely with officials, quote, to make this whole gun-grabbing thing come true. So they're primed for this as well, and they're not, if you listen to some of the discussions on major networks or even cable news networks, they're not having rational discussions about any of this. That's entirely beside the point. The whole thing is just to, whip up as much fear and outrage about the whole gun issue as they possibly can to try to get guns taken away. So that's their position on this. And they try to make it sound, so rational and whatever, but they never quote those statistics that you just mentioned because it would deflate the whole program. I mean, it would be like sticking a pin in a balloon. And people would then say, well, gee, if crime is trending way, way down, violent gun crime, then what do we need this for? And why is the trend going down? Oh, you mean gun ownership is going way up? Yeah, it seems like that might be related because criminals will be less likely to try to break into places where they thought maybe people had guns. And no, so all of this is being censored actively, not just ignored. But the orders have gone down, so to speak, from the top, that we're not going to be publishing any articles telling the truth about guns and crime, just the opposite.
Yeah, in particular, another thing that they're not mentioning. Now, you'll notice just a couple of days before Sandy Hook, you had the mall shooting in Oregon, where you had the responsible gun owner pulled his weapon, and the guy, saw him drawing down on it, and he shoots himself right away. And so, end of the carnage right there. And then right after Sandy Hook, you have an off-duty deputy who's working in a movie theater, and a guy starts shooting up a restaurant, and he flees inside the movie theater, whereupon the responsible gun owner takes him out right away. No lives lost, but yet the media has totally glossed over those stories as well. So again, it's just a very clear agenda being driven here by not only the politicians, but the media as well.
Yeah, I wrote something about this a while back. Part of the reason, this is not the whole reason, obviously. I mean, they just want to, black out all of this individual citizen, with a gun stops a crime. But part of their agenda is the government hates the idea that any individual, a private citizen or even an off-duty cop, would be doing the job of government. See? That's the way they perceive it. Well, we're the people that stop crime. We're the people who are in charge of, making sure criminals are put away. And so how does that make us look if some guy who's, sitting in a restaurant suddenly stops a crime because he happens to be carrying a gun? That makes us look, completely inept. And it also enforces the idea that if there were more people like this, that, we wouldn't need to be policing so heavy. So they have to stop all that, the government. They don't want any of this kind of stuff to get out because they have giant egos, and it makes them look ridiculous, and they want to keep that from happening.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely right. The interesting thing that I find is that over time, it appears that there's been an engineering underway to not only dumb down the American citizen, but also remove personal responsibility from your average American. So, for example, right now, 41% of the American people are at or below the poverty line and depend on some sort of government either entitlement or benefit in order to make it by. And they've removed that element of personal responsibility where, look, if it's up to me, first of all, it's my responsibility to defend myself, not the state, not the locality, not the federal government. It's mine. That mentality has shifted over the past 40, 50 years, probably since the 60s, I would say has been a real big shift towards that. How would you characterize how would you fix that problem, John, as far as how would you attack it, especially knowing that the media complex is so in the bag of the powers that be, these people in high influential places?
Yeah, you're completely right about this. And this is a really tough one in terms of solutions because it's gone so far without, really being questioned or stopped to the point now where you have, 40%, as you say, people dependent on the government, which means that they're not really responsible for their own lives in any possible way. So it takes people speaking out. It takes people writing about it, talking about it. People who are passionate about this issue, can even organize and make groups out of this, people for responsible citizens, people for individual responsibility, Americans for, personal independence, to make it known, to connect up with each other, that this is exactly the wrong direction that the country is moving, and to expose not only the agenda of government, which is to get more and more people dependent on it, but the ways in which they do this under these different guises, which I've written a lot about. It's all about this is the great humanitarian age and we are going to help everybody, and it's really the job of government. This is what modern government does. It helps people. We're all in this together, the greatest good for the greatest number. Mm-hmm. All of these kinds of ways of promoting, because this is a propaganda war that's also being waged to convince people that this is what government really does, and this illustrates how humane government actually is, the number of people they are helping. and therefore the number of people that need help. And it's like a closed system that just keeps going around and around, and it keeps getting bigger. So this whole thing has to be exposed at all levels. And as a reporter, one of the things that I've taken on is to try to expose the fake propaganda, because that ropes in a lot of people, especially young people, people in college, people in high school that are being, indoctrinated by their teachers, because young people are very responsive to high-flying ideals. You tell a young person, hey, this is all about helping people. Come on. Don't you think it's horrible that some people are suffering? Well, sure. Okay, so this is what government is doing, and they climb on board. And the numbers keep growing. So the essence of the psychological operation, the propaganda campaign, that whole thing needs to be exposed for the fraud that it is.
Yeah, really, when it all comes down to it, everything's like 180 degrees out of phase with what they say. That's the thing that I find is when they say, well, this collectivist mentality, it's good, it benefits. Everybody's going to, we're working together to forge a better, a greater society. And what's really happening is the exact opposite. Society's going to hell in a handbasket. We've got, in all honesty, I mean, morality is at an all-time low. I mean, heck, I can go on TBS prime time and have my kids sitting there, and next thing you know, there's a Trojan vibrator commercial that comes on. Prime time television. And the demoralization of America, that was one way to be able to advance their agenda, but also the hijacking of the press. I mean, Timmy and I talk about this all the time, about how it was J.P. Morgan back in the teens and the 20s of the 20th century, almost 100 years ago, when he went and started to buy people's loyalty, get into the major newspapers and start directing things, putting editors in place that he wanted to put in place and start driving the news. And, Timmy, you said it best when you were in broadcast school. There's two basic rules. One, always follow the truth. And two, never let any entangling alliances get in the way of rule number one. And I think that is such an interesting way of looking at it, because really who's supposed to provide the checks and balances, John? It's the press, I mean, the government, we can't rely on them. They're not going to check and balance themselves as much as we'd like them to. I just don't think it's realistic. It's the press that's supposed to really turn the screws on these people when something nefarious is afoot, and that just clearly isn't happening now.
That's why we have to become the press. Because, I could spend a year, literally, with one article that reveals something truly important, trying to convince an editor in the mainstream to publish, that article. I could go from one editor to another, from one magazine or newspaper to another, on. And I've had, those experiences in the past. That's why I got out of that business. And I would never get it published. And I would never write anything else, because all my time would be taken up trying to break through that ceiling of censorship. Whereas now, 30 seconds after I write it, it's out there on my website, and, thousands of people are reading it, and it's on other websites, and I'm getting actually better coverage or better response than I would if it was published in a newspaper. So that's where we have to go with this.
It's interesting you say that, because there's a former CIA guy, Robert Steele, that now he hasn't done any interviews for quite some time, but when he was and doing workshops and things like that, he talked about the importance of the blogosphere and how everybody out there that could possibly start a blog should start one and tether themselves to a particular subject or whatever interests you. Just start writing about it. Just start throwing it out there. And you made a great point, because for people that aspire to affect change or to do good works as part of the mainstream media, I think they're going to be sadly disappointed when they get there because of the censorship and because of the agendas. So would you recommend that to anybody that wants to get involved and get active in a way that you are to start their own blog and do it independently?
You bet. You bet. And not only that, but to take the story or to take the issue that you are most passionate about, research it from top to bottom, keep on writing stories about it, one after another, pound on it day after day, because that also gets attention. And that's something else that the media never does. Even if you see an interesting story in major media that breaks, most of the time, if it exposes a little bit of the truth, it's shut down right away. You don't see that story or any version of it reappear again. No follow-up, no nothing. Whereas the real way to do journalism, which has been completely lost in this country, is you take this kind of a story, you pound on it day after day after day, articles keep getting published, and then, lo and behold, people come out of the woodwork. People who, now feel pressure because the story's being covered on and on and on, and they confess their own sins and how they were part of it. That adds to the story, now fuel to the fire. I've seen this happen time and time again. In fact, online, on the Internet, I've written stories that I thought were key stories that got picked up by other people. They started to run with the ball, and they began to find new information, and then from that information, I was able to, find more myself, and you build and you build and you build, but you don't stop. You just keep pounding on it.
Yeah, no, I agree, John. And matter of fact, this is one of the reasons why I'm so proud of you. And I wish more people would step away from their big media gig and decide to do what you've done. You know, what I've done, I was in the business for 30 years, and after Reagan deregulation, the whole thing just fell apart, and we saw, what it became today. And it's like, all right, I can do this on my own. I can create my own studio. I can write on my own. And again, you've done it, and you're kind of like the person, the big fish leading the way.
That's right. Now, we're going to go to break. When we come back, we'll have much more with Jon Rappoport. Don't forget, folks, it's jonrappoport.wordpress.com or nomorefakenews.com. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away. Folks, don't forget that you can take Orion Talk Radio with you wherever you go by listening to us on your smartphone with the TuneIn app. Just download the free software, then do a search for Orion Talk Radio. Save us as a preset, and you can listen to Orion anytime, anywhere. Orion Talk Radio on TuneIn, a must-have app for your smartphone. Joe Joseph and Tim Watts here. We're joined by Jon Rappoport of jonrappoport.wordpress.com and nomorefakenews.com. And we're discussing the gun control thing, and I want to get into a little bit about the psychiatry aspect of it, John, and how we've become such a drugged-up society. I hate to call it that, but that's really what it is. And I kind of feel like it's rooted in selfishness in one hand, and the other hand is here we have a situation in this country where the wages right now are at 1995 levels. But things don't cost what they did in 1995. So parents are having to work twice as hard as they did back in 1995 just to make ends meet. And it can be troublesome when you have kids to actually have to discipline them and maybe spend time with them. It's so much easier to put them on drugs and just have them kind of vegetate their way through their youth, if you will. I mean, do you see that as a major shift in the way that the mindset of this country's been as far as, how we rear our children and everything else?
Yes, I do, and it's incredibly destructive because we're not fooling around here with, just mild little drugs. These are highly toxic, dangerous drugs that they're prescribing to kids and adults all over America. And not only that, but some of these drugs induce violent behavior, including suicide and homicide. So look at what's happening. Not only are these kids having their childhood robbed from them by being drugged up, but they're also in imminent danger of spinning completely out of control and starting to commit horrendous crimes, which they are, under the influence of these psychiatric drugs. And nobody in the establishment, government, media, certainly not in the medical cartel, wants anybody to know about this. They know about it.
Yes, they do. And it looks like we may have a little technical difficulty here, eh, Timmy?
Yeah, it sounds like John might have lost his cell phone connection there. Which is
it looks like he may have lost it. We're going to try and get him back. But in the meantime, go ahead, Tim.
He's right on the mark, It's like, and it's so many of these shootings you found, these people were, on SSRI drugs. And there's a whole lot of them out there, everything from Paxil to Zoloft. And, of course, that's the way it goes, isn't it? New World Order, got Jon Rappoport on, and let's cut that guy down.
Yeah, let's just shaw him off with the legs.
Because he's talking about big pharma and he's talking about drugs and the connection with what's going on in this world. But we all see it at night. You can't turn on your television without. And my wife and I, we sit there and we laugh. Cymbalta, are you depressed?
Like you got cut off, huh?
Yeah. Well, you're talking about a very sensitive subject there, John. You might want to censor your speech a little bit. The Politburo has the red button there.
Yeah, so it was right in the middle of a sentence, and all of a sudden, bang, we're gone, right?
Yeah,
that
happens a lot.
Well, that's what's happening to the country. And to bring up this whole psychiatric connection, when we're talking about Sandy Hook, Aurora, and many other cases that go back to Columbine, school shootings that have occurred since then, workplace shootings where somebody comes in and just goes crazy and starts shooting up the place, and then we discover that they are on these drugs. And these drugs have been well researched by independent investigators who have, some of whom have published studies that show that the drugs indeed do cause people to go over the edge and commit all sorts of violence.
And that's just the initial studies. I mean, a lot of these drugs, John, haven't been out long enough to know what the long-term effects are going to be. They just go by, if they do have some sort of study on it, typically it's on animals or even, the human studies, but never over a course of years at a time. And then you never know how it affects them once they enter into adulthood. So all these kids that are being put on these SSRI uptake inhibitors, all this other stuff, the Prozac. No one really knows the long-term consequences of this. I kind of equate it almost to cell phones. No one knows what the danger or the damage is of holding a transmitter up to your head for hours at a time. But, that's one thing that, I happen to work on is I'm a communications guy. That's what I do. And I know that you're not supposed to put transmitters up to your head for hours at a time. It doesn't matter how big they are, But that's the thing is we haven't hit that time yet where people are dropping like flies from brain tumors or anything else. So do you foresee this as a major crisis coming down the line?
Oh, yeah, I think it's already here. I think a lot of it is being masked and obscured because a lot of crimes are being attributed to other things. And then you have lots of people, especially kids, where you don't see overt criminal behavior. It's just that their lives have collapsed completely. I mean, here's a typical scenario. Kids in school, not happy. Maybe he's, in a classroom with some other nasty kids, or he's distracted by one thing or another. The teacher's not that great. Or he's very, very bright, and he's bored out of his mind by what's happening. So he gets shoveled over to the school counselor, who refers him to a psychiatrist. Parents show up with the kid, and the psychiatrist diagnoses him with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Bang, right off the bat. Oh, yeah, the symptoms are obvious. So now we prescribe Ritalin or Adderall. These drugs are speed. There's no getting around it. They're amphetamine-like drugs. So for the next few days, or maybe even a few weeks, or if the kid is really lucky, a few months, like anybody who's doing a little speed at first, feels a lot better, more focused, concentrated, studies better, everybody's happy, and then goes downhill, declines in a slow motion or quick speed crash, which is what happens to people that take speed over a period of time. Now parents, drag him back to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says, well, what we're seeing here is the emergence of a new condition, clinical depression. And so I'm going to have to put him on Prozac or Zoloft or Paxil. And the mother says timidly, do you think, his state of mind now has anything to do with the fact that he was on Ritalin? Oh, couldn't be, not impossible, no connection. Puts him on Prozac. Now the kid is going up and down into manic phase and depression and all over the place. Back to the psychiatrist, who says, the more precise definition of what's bothering your child is bipolar disease. So now we're going to put him on lithium or valproate. These drugs can just, practically kill you. All along, the drugs keep getting heavier and heavier, and even Ritalin is a very heavy drug, although people, in the profession don't want to admit it. It is. So now you've got millions of these kids, as well as adults, that are on all these drugs, and their lives are just going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, they can't cope. They don't know what to do. They can't concentrate. They feel strange, out of control. Their life is not their own. Reality is getting very, very strange to them. And now they have to face the world. What are they going to do? They're going to become dependent on the government. They're going to find a way to get some kind of benefits on disability or this or that. And this has a lot to do with why we see so many people on disability today. It's just literally eating out the country from the inside. We're already there. It's not, it's going to get worse, but it's already horrendous.
Yeah, the drug problem in this country is certainly, and of course, that has nothing to do with recreational drugs. To me, those are one of the most harmless drugs out there compared to the crap they're shoveling down our kids' throats, I don't know, and you're absolutely right. I remember back before I was really informed on things, my wife and I, we've got 4 kids, and our oldest was having problems in school, so, we take him to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician says, well, he's having trouble focusing, so we could put him on these. He's got attention deficit, so we could put him on this stuff. And we said, well, no, we don't want any stimulant medication. No, we don't want any Ritalin or Adderall or anything like that. So they put him on a non-stimulant drug called Strattera. And Strattera messed him up so bad that when he was getting ready for school one morning, and this is what got us to take him off it. He's sitting there looking at his shoelaces. They were untied, and he was just bawling in tears because he had to tie his shoes. And I'm like, good grief. That's what this stuff does? Heck no. And ever since then, it was about a year later after that, we pulled him out of school, and we homeschooled him. And it was one of the best things that we ever did. I have to say,
I urge everybody to do that. I am a big supporter of homeschooling, and I think it's, the answer to public education.
Well,
There's
again,
another thing I should point out about the drugs, and that is just to prove how dangerous all these are. And I'm talking about any psychiatric drug now. Withdrawing suddenly from it can be worse than even taking it.
Oh, yeah.
Because these drugs are all addictive, and they can produce some really dangerous, horrendous effects if anybody suddenly tries to withdraw from them. It should be done under supervision of somebody who understands what the issues are and who is, sympathetic and realizes that these drugs are horrendously dangerous. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is why the homeschool movement is, continuing to grow in America, because for a variety of reasons, people realize, hey, this is a dictatorship I've got my kid in here, and
Yeah.
I'm going to take him out and teach him myself.
That's right. They're indoctrination centers. I equate it to having USDA stamped on their ass and sent through the assembly line.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously, that's what it is.
Yeah, you're right.
I equate it to this, I tell my son this all the time. I went to public school, and that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person for doing it. But I'll tell you this, 90% of the stuff I learned in public school, I don't remember. I didn't retain a lick of it. The everything that I learned in my life has been through life experience and through a thirst for knowledge, but primarily it's life experience that's taught me all this stuff. And that's what I try to harp on him the most, and what we do is we're actually his curriculum is centered around entrepreneurialism, because that's the other thing too, is that do you want to answer to somebody or do you want to be your own boss? Because you could take it as far as you want. See, everybody here, and especially in public school, well, you got to go to college, you got to go get that education. But now when you go to college, you're so encumbered by debt, and the education that you're getting in college is subpar at best. So, it's like, look, explore your options. If that's what you want to do, fine. But, that's up to you. The thing is your life experience is what's going to drive you. It's going to teach you what you want to know, or, what you may be interested in and everything else. And you just start kind of piecing things together and figuring out yourself. I think public school actually convolutes things and also lets entities, like local, state, federal government, get in there and brainwash these kids, either through curriculum or through, teachers' opinions and everything else. And again, it all comes back down to personal responsibility, John. It's taking ownership of the fact that you're a parent and that you have to do not only what's in the best interest of your children, but you have to make sure that your children actually grow up to be productive members of society that don't encumber society. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and what you just encapsulated there in a minute or two, where would you ever find that taught in a school at any level? Nowhere. I mean, that's incredible, because if you look back at the founding documents of the Republic, they have a lot to do with what you just said. So you would think, okay, well, in this country, then you're going to find that somewhere in the educational system. Good luck. Try to look for it. See where anything is taught in any school, anywhere, about personal responsibility, about the entrepreneurial spirit, about the independence and freedom of the individual, about the power of the individual. Any of that is completely censored out of any curriculum in any school. It's considered by many people to be, fascism. That's the way they would characterize it. No, it's got to be all about the group. It's got to be all about the collective. We're all in this together, blah, 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 blah. And so if anybody, a student, speaks out about this, they're just, excommunicated and ridiculed because they're standing up for what the original meaning of the country is. And so how are you going to justify, as a responsible parent, sending your kid into an institution like that? It's tantamount to saying, okay, I want to drive my kid insane and make him completely dependent, so I'm going to put him in the school system.
Yeah. John, you've written so many invaluable articles. I mean, I could spend all day going through your blog. Again, folks, Jon Rappoport's blog. You can Google it. Easy to find. It's very easy to find. Your name comes up immediately, John. And, of course, No More Fake News. But something you've touched on a lot is psychiatry. We've kind of hit a little bit on psychiatry here, but shifting it in a different direction now as far as where they're going with gun control. How did you feel after the Obama executive orders came out and they started to proffer the health angle?
You mean the mental health angle?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that was just another dead giveaway, because look at what it's just the opposite of what they need to do. Because I've been researching the psychiatric drugs for, 15, 20 years now. So I know that when you expand mental health services, what that means is that more people are going to be diagnosed with these fictional mental disorders, and then they're going to be drugged with these dangerous drugs, and some of these people are going to go out and they're going to commit violent crimes. So this is supposed to be a program to prevent that from happening before it does, right? To expand mental health services. Well, this is just putting more people into that same system. And it's also making them more dependent upon other people because, well, my boy, you've got a mental disorder and it's called blah, blah, blah. And, you know, the rest of your life, you're basically going to have to struggle and strive to become normal. And we're going to help you with chemicals that you can depend upon for the rest of your life. And it's just indoctrinating people into a system where they really are not free and they're really not responsible anymore. So this is what Obama is basically setting up because he wants to and intends to expand mental health services all over America. That's the goal, and that's the rationalization as to how we're going to supposedly stop the next Sandy Hook from happening, which is absurd because it'll have nothing to do with that. In fact, it'll encourage the next Sandy Hook.
That's right,
Yeah.
and even more so, guys. Think about this. I mean, not only will it encourage the next Sandy Hook, but it actually encourages more of this unstable behavior. It further destabilizes society. And the other thing is to kind of remember, too, is that criminals don't care about the law. So these guns and everything else, you take away the guns, it's not going to take away guns from the average Joe criminal, if you will, you know?
You bet.
And so
I should mention one thing. I'll try to boil it down very quickly, but there's a trial that has been postponed I don't know how many times now in Chicago, big drug trial. Jesus Niebla, who is a high-ranking member of the Sinaloa drug cartel in Mexico, was arrested, brought to the United States. He's been in jail for a few years now. His defense lawyers claim that they have documents that prove that the federal government has made a deal with the Sinaloa drug cartel to provide them with immunity from prosecution in return for giving the feds information on rival drug cartels in Mexico. And the federal government has kept these documents from being put on the record in that trial under national security. They are being kept from the trial and the public. How this now plays out is you've got gang violence all over America, gun violence, criminals who get their guns wherever they get them. Some of these gangs are working as subcontractors for the Sinaloa cartel that's moving tons of cocaine and heroin into Chicago and then out to the rest of the country. So if indeed this is true that the Sinaloa cartel, which is the biggest of them, has gotten immunity from prosecution, look at what we're talking about here in terms of gun violence. Basically, the federal government is actually promoting gun violence way more than Fast and Furious. This is chronic all over America because these gangs are being permitted to operate as drug dealers, subcontractors to a huge cartel that's been granted immunity from prosecution by the federal government.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a gigantic story, and it's not being covered.
And of course, you're not hearing about it in the mainstream media. And I guess before we go, let's just touch real quick on why people don't hear about that in the mainstream media. And it has to do with that CFR connection. And we talked, off air in between the break there about, how so many media members now are part of the Council on Foreign Relations. And that may not seem like a big thing to people out there in the listening audience, people that haven't been in the industry before. But, as you mentioned, it's very much like a social clique. And that's probably one of the bigger reasons why a lot of these people seem to gravitate to the CFR. But to me, it's such a huge danger. I like to say this is the reason why we were sold yellow cake from Niger, and weapons of mass destruction and the false Iraq 9/11 tie that we wore because of this CFR connection with our mainstream media. How do you feel about that, John?
Absolutely. And it is a gigantic social scene. It centers in New York City. It's the Eastern Establishment, as they used to be called. the controllers, the people who are not only extremely wealthy, but are using their wealth to try to dominate society. And they band together. And then they invite media members to join their clique. And this doesn't only involve the CFR itself, it involves social events, charity fundraisers, parties, all over, the East Coast.
That's right.
And a media person desperately wants to get into that because it could advance his career. But as soon as he gets in there and sees what's going on, he realizes that his career is utterly dependent upon never crossing these people,
Yep,
always
Jon,
being on their side.
Jon, thanks for coming on today. We're out of